What's going on, everybody? Culturedog Sam Hatch back here with some more LaserDisc talk. As I mentioned in the last video, I've been watching a lot of LDs, usually at night before I call it a day. And yeah, one night I was just, burnt out. It was a tough day at work. I was just like, I'm tired. I just want to kind of like chill, go to bed a little bit early, and I don't want to like have to wake up off the couch and go upstairs. So I'm like, I need to fire up my LDS1. And so this one I didn't actually watch in surround sound, so I can't really... I probably should have watched it again on the big home theater system and the projector and everything like that, like I did with Brain Scan. But I did watch this on a good old CRT TV that's been doing me justice since 1995, and LDS1 Pioneer player. So even though I wasn't listening to it in proper Dolby Surround or Dolby Prologic, it was still awesome, and I'm glad I checked it out. So yeah, I ended up just relaxing and watching this movie, and it was like the perfect choice. It is Joe Versus the Volcano, and I recently acquired this on LaserDisc, which I'm so glad I did. We'll get more on the disc a little bit later. But the film itself came out on March 9th in 1990, and I was a little more selective about what I went to go see at the time, sometimes out of necessity, because I was in charge of my own funds for the most part at that point. I'd been working stiff and that sort of thing, still doing school and things like that. But so I didn't have as much pocket change. So of course, I went to go see Total Recall and stuff like that. But yeah, some things just slipped through the cracks. This was one of the ones that slipped through the cracks, and much like some other films that I discovered with joy on cable, like The Lost Boys, this was just one of those things. I think it was HBO. I think it was a summer night. It was just like one of those kind of magic moments where you saw a film that you weren't expecting to like, because this was fairly well ravaged by critics. Not all of them. I think Ebert gave it a nice review. But yeah, it just happened on cable, and it just connected with me. There was a lot of stuff in the late 80s, early 90s that was, weird or quirky, some of which, could just seem like it was trying to cash in on the success of other quirky films, like those from Terry Gilliam and Tim Burton. And this is not a too far throw from a lot of that material, but sometimes it was just trying too hard, and it just didn't connect with me, like the film Toys, even though I love every moment that LL Cool J is in that movie. Yeah, some of that stuff would just leave me cold, but then some of it really, really connected with me. Joe Versus the Volcano, like, for one, it's not a straight-up romantic comedy. It's not even a straight-up comedy for the most part. I mean, it does have comedic moments, but not in your typical Tom Hanks bachelor party fashion. And it's way more of a fairy tale, which is obvious from the beginning and ending of the film with the kind of fairy tale lead-in. But yeah, it's really, really visually interesting. John Patrick Shanley did it, who's since done a ton of plays and things like that, but was known at the time for having written Moonstruck. So yeah, John Patrick Shanley came at this thing with a real vision. And I mean, the people involved on the Colleen Atwood did the costumes. Bo Welch did the production design, so knocked it out of the park. And it's got different tones, and they're all really interesting and quirky, and it starts off very, expressionistic and, throwbacks to, of course, newer films at the time, like Terry Gilliam's Brazil, but then, of course, all the German films from, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Metropolis, etc. Yeah, it's very over the top in its symbolism and its design, production design, etc. like that. It's very... it's not quite cartoonish, but it's an elevated, heightened world that Joe Banks, played by Tom Hanks, resides in. And he's, he looks a little weirder. He's got these like kind of longer, greasy locks, and he's shown shuffling like the workers in Fritz Lang's Metropolis into American Panoscope, which is like home of the rectal probe. And there's all these great signs and set details leading the way as they kind of go through this crooked path that's a repeated theme throughout the film, this kind of like jagged lightning bolt path that leads up into the building, very Brazil-esque. And then they, kind of descend this endless stairway, and then he just works in this creepy office with Dan Hedaya, who's great. And it's very, I didn't mention David Lynch, but there is some David Lynch kind of running through this film as well, especially in terms of some of the funnier bits being not traditional humor, but just funny through weird repetition. Like Dan Hedaya is his boss, and he's just introduced on the phone with a guy repeating the same things over and over again. He's like, yeah, I know he can get the job, but can he do the job? And it, by the 100th time you hear it, it's just hilarious. And yeah, Joe Banks hates the fact that he's under these horrible fluorescent lights, and the coffee in the place stinks, and he's secretly harboring some feelings for Meg Ryans' character, one of the many Meg Ryan characters in the film, which was part of the reason the film was lambasted for being a little too gimmicky, but then other people lavished praise on it because of her different characterizations and what she brought to the film. I really like her character from this kind of like mousy girl working in the office environment, and Joe's this dude in the corner, and he's got this lamp on his desk. So this lamp is this representation of all his hopes and dreams, and also a little bit of foreshadowing for events later in the film. But that's like our first burst of primary colors. And as a kid, I remember just being blown away by the artificial reality of films like South Pacific, but these super intense sunsets and things like that, and just the vibe of those those beaches and everything like that. And there's a great line in the film where he's in Los Angeles for the first time, and Meg Ryan's one of her other characters is asking him what he thinks of the landscape, and he said something like, "It looks fake. I love it." And that's part of what I love about this film, is that it taps into that kind of artificial, heightened sense of style of some of those older Technicolor films. And so his lamp is the kind of physical manifestation of that, of all those hopes and dreams. And Joe Banks always thinks he's sick, so he's always going out to the doctor. Robert Stack plays his doctor in the film, who alerts him to the fact that he's got a brain cloud, and that he's actually a hypochondriac suffering from post-traumatic stress from being a really successful, heroic fireman. Again, more foreshadowing. This thing is, again, at the time, I was a real sucker for aggressive camera angles this side of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead films, and of course, Phil Joannou's 3 O'Clock High. So this was already right up my alley. And of course, it's got a lot of the same people that were working on Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands at the same time. So all those things I loved were kind of coalescing in this film. And, I just like the kind of the ennui of the character. I was really, I was an angsty kid. I was into stuff like Hamlet and things like that at the time. So I wasn't a working stiff in the terms of office jockey like this guy was. I didn't feel like downtrodden by my desk job or anything like that. But I could still tap into his sense of alienation, and I loved it. And so the film kind of changes tone a little bit as he breaks free, because he's got nothing to lose now. And Lloyd Bridges rolls in as this weird, quirky superconductor businessman who offers Joe this chance to hurl himself into a volcano on a strange little Pacific isle in order to exchange for this unobtainium substitute as a mineral to be used in his superconductors. And having nothing to lose, Joe goes for it. And of course, it's a little bit of a cliche as his life means nothing and he's hit bottom, so to speak, Tyler Durden style. He's actually enjoying his life now, and he doesn't feel sick anymore, and he's encountering all these interesting characters and people. His journey to recreating himself is fantastic, because Ossie Davis shows up as this limo driver he hires, and they have some great pieces. John Patrick Shanley wrote this and directed it, and his writing, you could tell he was a playwright. They just have some really great bits of dialogue, interesting characters. I love the interaction between Joe and his luggage salesman, who puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of luggage, which actually becomes a plot point later on in the film. But that stuff's great. Meg Ryan's second character is a little bit of a flibbertigibbet, and so she's a little over the top and has this kind of Holly Hunter-esque vibe. But these great interactions between Joe and these characters. And then the third, well, actually, there's a voiceover. So the third physical character that Meg Ryan plays is a little bit more a natural character. And again, you kind of paint Joe as a little bit of a jerk because it's like obviously easy for him to be this cool, uncarved block of a character because he hasn't experienced life before and he's got nothing to lose. And these other characters do have things to lose. So it could easily have felt forced for him to like help them live. He is like kind of like a Forrest Gump-esque character, help them realize, how they should be living their lives or whatever like that. But yeah, it's easy for him because he doesn't care. He thinks he's about to die. But it toes that line magnificently. And again, I said it's not really hilarious. And there's like a wacky moment shortly thereafter where they're on a ship and there's him fishing. And, it's kind of goofy physical humor. But then it's turned into this totally eccentric moment as this super fake but awesome looking like hammerhead shark puppet crops up as something he reels out of the water. It's just magnificent in its fakeness, but with visual ingenuity. It's got a little bit of Life of Pi in it in terms of being out on the water and experiencing these amazing, possibly hallucinogenic vistas, but all done by like ILM and I think another company, but with practical effects and green screen or blue screen possibly at the time. But yeah, it looks fantastic. It's got a great like 2.35:1 scope vista, so it's one of those things where it could easily have been like a studio product that tried to be quirky to cash in on other successful filmmakers. But you get a real sense that John Patrick Shanley had something. He had a vision and he was going for it. And maybe it was a little too weird at the time for Tom Hanks fans, and a little too like just obscure and random. But it's so much fun. Abe Vigoda is great in a bunch of scenes on the island when they finally get there. Nathan Lane also has a little bit of a cameo on there. So I thought maybe I latched onto some elements about it that I liked, but overall the film wasn't really that great. So let's see if it stood the test of time. It totally stood the test of time. It was awesome, and it's got some interesting tunes on the soundtrack, mostly old throwback jams. So it's not loaded with heavy metal tunes like Brain Scan, sadly. But no, it sounded really good. I didn't hear it in the Dolby Surround, but on my LDS1 into stereo speakers on my Magnavox CRT TV, it was great. Yeah, so I actually had an absolute blast revisiting the LaserDisc. Because when I saw this originally, it was on HBO and Pan and Scan, and this thing, as I mentioned before, was shot in scope. And this letterboxed copy is gorgeous. I really appreciate that Warner put the effort, because this is an early release. In 1990, letterboxing had kind of, when Criterion decided that they were going to keep the OAR, the original aspect ratio, of theatrical exhibitions of films in like around 86, that was like their official mantra. If it was widescreen, they're going to put it letterboxed on LaserDisc, and that kind of started to seep over into bigger studio product. And around 88 or so, it started to become more of a thing on LaserDisc. And Warner was pretty good about letterboxing things. Sometimes not always at the correct ratio. Lost Boys was a little bit of a weird one, but this was a great case with them getting it right. Because sometimes they would have the equivalent of this silver stripe there on the jacket. And sometimes they obviously don't tell you widescreen. So I was really amazed when I looked on the back and they just have that little widescreen logo to indicate there. I really thought for sure this was going to be Pan and Scan. But one, they crushed it with the cover art. It's freaking gorgeous. And then on the back, you see it's widescreen. So it's like, bam. So early 90s release, they did it right out of the gate. I don't know if John Patrick Shanley was, because sometimes it would take a director with a little bit of a vision to kind of push them to release it correctly from the start. But it looks fantastic. So there are a lot of other contemporary discs around the time that I have enjoyed the look of. Dead Calm, Batman, obviously. But I was impressed because this is a really beautiful film. There's a lot of, once it breaks free of the kind of grim environs of Joe's America Panoscope, job, it becomes this, Technicolor wonderland. It becomes his lamp on his desk, writ large. And the LaserDisc looked fantastic. The letterboxing was great. I believe there's a Warner Archive Blu-ray out there, which I will definitely have to get, but I had a freaking wonderful time with this. I mentioned before in one of my videos, I think it was LaserDisc, Why Bother, about the time travel aspect of this. And, when there is a Warner Archive Blu-ray out there, why bother watching something like this? But it's like I had previously seen it on cable and pan and scan. And seeing this, a nice pressing, letterboxed on my LDS1, on my vintage CRT, I mean, how can I not enjoy that? Because I most certainly would have enjoyed that when I watched this back in the day, and there really wasn't anything about the experience that changed. It's just weighing it against certain things. But why the hell do I want to weigh it against a Blu-ray when I haven't seen the Blu-ray? And I might as well just ride the thunder and enjoy the hell out of this thing, and I did. So it is catalog number 11912. It is 2 sides, obviously 1 disc. It's got 13 chapter stops on side 1. 10 on side 2, letterboxed obviously for, I don't know if it's the exact 2.35 to 1. I didn't take out the measuring tape or anything like that, but a close equivalent. It's got CX noise reduction on the analog tracks, which are also matrix encoded for Dolby Surround, and then of course it's got the PCM stereo audio with Dolby Surround on there as well. It's got closed captioning for the hearing impaired or just somebody who wants to put some captions on the sucker, assuming you have a television that is capable of doing so. Yeah, it's a nice release. Pioneer pressed it. I think it was Pioneer USA. Absolutely no speckling, no rot or anything like that. It's just clean stuff. Looks fantastic. The colors were punchy. I didn't see a lot of noise or nothing super distracting. There's some scenes that are a little bit farther away when he comes out of his doctor's office. There's a very, very long shot, and there's a lot of detail on the side of the building. It's, this big brick building with lots of intricate brickwork and everything like that. So that you could see a little bit of aliasing or line noise or things like that, just because it's so far a shot and the details are so small on the 4:3 television screen. But small complaints. There was a German release in PAL, which I haven't seen, obviously, but strangely, much like Brainscan, there's no Japanese equivalent. Not a lot of love for Joe Versus the Volcano across the globe on LaserDisc. So again, even more of a godsend that Warner Brothers got it right out of the gate. Supposedly, the listings say it was only $24.98 when it dropped, which is a really great price. Again, one of those things in LD forums that the hyperbole thrown around about LD pricing is crazy, because yes, there were box sets that cost $100 and up. Much like there are box sets of Blu-rays that cost a ton of coin. There's box sets of anything. There's high-end collectible versions of things that cost high amounts of money, just like it was on LaserDisc. But in reality, there were tons of discs that were under $30. There were price saver ones you could roll into Suncoast and get for $20 or $25. You can get things that were on discount, like that Brainscan that had the punch out. But I mean, even so, like a lot of the Fox gatefolds and things like that of high profile titles like Star Wars, those were like $60, but there was always a way around it. Like you can go to the Columbia House Laserdisc Club and get them for $1 a pop plus their expensive, shipping. But yeah, stuff like this was like $25. And sometimes if you went to a certain seller that would have like pre-sales, put a little bit down, maybe you get a percentage off. Sometimes you were paying a little bit less than that. So it wasn't all doom and gloom financially with LaserDisc. You could roll into a Suncoast and pick up, 3 titles or something like that, even if you weren't a rich person. You were just a regular schmuck like myself. So the price was right. Obviously, it wasn't a beloved film when it dropped because it was maybe a little bit too weird for audiences, in particular Tom Hanks fans. They much rather enjoyed his other pairings with Meg Ryan and Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail. Yeah, the LDDB mentions that it came out on August 22nd, which is a possibility. I believe the videotape was released to rental on August 15th, and as I mentioned before on the Brainscan Spotlight review, day and date wasn't an easy thing with LaserDisc. Sometimes the VHS release date came and then you just waited as an LD fan for weeks and weeks. But again, if you were into this stuff, you waited, because this was in the original theatrical ratio, much higher resolution than VHS, even though a lot of the resolution is wasted on black bars. But yeah, don't argue with me. But yeah, it was worth waiting for. But so that does seem likely that it came out a week later than the VHS on LD. It's not a very rare title as far as I know, even though I don't run into it that often. But if you want it, you can probably get it super cheap, or just get the Blu-ray from Warner Archive or whatever. But yeah, it's a really nice LD, and punchy, vibrant picture, and the sound sounded good on my CRT TV, so I'm assuming it's going to sound good on my stereo system as well. So I recommend you find a copy if you're an LD fan and you like kind of weird, quirky movies from the late 80s, early 90s. Check it out, Joe Versus the Volcano. Cheers, everybody.